Hey everybody, this is Bart Hansen for CrushLivePoker.com, and today we're going to take a look and review a hand from one of the legends of poker, one of the original No Limit Hold'em legends, Doyle Brunson, and this hand came from this past week on day one of the $10,000 buy-in main event at the World Series of Poker. Now, we're going to start this hand off here at levels 300, 500 with a $500 ante, and everyone gets 60,000 in chips. This was level 4 of day one, and it's going to start off a little bit unorthodox here. As you see, most of the players in this particular hand are actually over 100 big blinds deep, with the exception of the big blind. Win here from +1 is going to limp in here with tens. Definitely non-standard, especially with an ante. I would say 95% of the players here are going to raise in a spot like this. Now, this is really where it gets a little bit strange. Doyle Brunson here from the cutoff does not raise. He just chooses to limp along. Now, whether that's an old school play or not, I've started to see that a little bit in terms of flatting raises, especially with a lot of weak players behind you heads up, but I would almost always isolate a guy that would limp from up front unless somebody was just habitually limp re-raising. I mean, I know it is day one in the main event, but definitely non-standard. So you want to drive the people in the blinds out and pick up the dead money in the antes. That's why you would want to ISO raise. But he decides to limp along. That's going to bring in the small blind, who actually has the most chips in this particular hand. He completes with the 4 deuce of clubs, and this guy in the big blind low list gets a free look at queen 3 of clubs. So they're going to go to the flop here with the pot being 2,500. So the board comes out, ace of clubs, 9 of hearts, deuce of spades. Pretty good flop here for ace king. Not really the best flop for tens, although he's got second pair to the board. And we start off with a lead here from the small blind, this guy Yaman. And I really don't mind the play in a limp pot. You don't really expect a whole lot of people to have big aces here. I don't think that you would ever really expect someone to have a hand as good as ace king. And he's got bottom pair, and he also has a backdoor flush draw, a backdoor straight draw. And this is just a classic case of you would actually like to just take the hand down right now. He can actually get folds from better hands like, say, pocket fives, pocket sixes, something like that. So it's not really a terrible play to lead out here for 1K. Obviously, the big blind's going to get out of the way, and he gets over here to win. And even though Doyle Brunson's behind him, he is going to make the call here, which I think is really close. I mean, he does have second pair to the board, but he does have a player behind him. And this guy is leading out of the small blind, but obviously he's beating the guy in the small blind. So he continues with the call. And then we get it over here to Doyle, and he hasn't raised pre-flop. He's got this guy in the small blind leading out who can almost have any 2 cards. So he decides not to build the pot up here, and he just calls. And, you know, that's a little bit defensive. I mean, you don't want to raise and get a weak ace to fold or something like that, and the small blind can be very wide. So I think I'm on board with that as we move to the turn, and the pot is $5,500. So the turn here is the ace of spades, and it puts a backdoor spade draw out here. And now Yaman's going to check, and I think that's a really good play to put on the brakes when you get 2 people to call. There's even though there's less of a chance someone has an ace here with a second one coming out, pretty good chance that someone is probably going to have something that's not going to fold. Win also checks, and it gets over here to Doyle, and he's going to bet 3,500 here into a pot of 5,500, and he's absolutely got to think that he has the best hand. It is also interesting to note here, there really aren't a whole lot of draws here out in the flop. I mean, it's a rainbow board. There's a couple of wheel draws like 3-4 and 4-5 and 3-5, but that's just about it. And if I was in Doyle Brunson's spot, I really wouldn't think that anyone had an ace here, especially if I have ace king. So if he sizes here about 2/3, I'm really going to try to think about trying to extract value from a hand like a 9x or maybe something like pocket tens like Win has. He goes 3,500 here, and obviously Yaman with the guy behind him is going to get out of the way, and it gets over here to Win, and Win is not convinced. He's going to continue to call here, perhaps thinking that Doyle might have raised, obviously with an ace pre-flop. And, you know, if I was in Win's spot, there's less of a chance that Doyle might have an ace, and this could easily go check, and Win could win it. So he makes the $3,500 call. So now the pot is 12,500, and we go to the river. And what a river it is here for Win. It is the 10 of hearts, so he makes tens full. He starts the river off with a check here, which I think really does make a lot of sense, because if Doyle does have an ace, he is absolutely going to value bet. And if Wynn just comes out and bets, Doyle probably will just call. Although in this particular case, Doyle actually might have raised with ace king. But, if you're in Wynn's spot, you just don't really think that Doyle has a hand as strong as ace king. So, and then if Doyle had some sort of bluff, like if he had like 4-5 of spades, something like that took off on the flop, bet the turn, he's going to continue to bluff because he has absolutely nothing. So you're going to get the value from ace X that's going to bet here, and you're going to get the value from some bluffs. So this makes a lot of sense here to check. And obviously Doyle here is going to bet. Now, this is where I think is a little bit interesting. It really doesn't seem like Wynn has played this like ace X here at all. Doyle takes a pot size bet. This is the kind of bet that I would want to make if I really thought the other player also had trips. But the way that this hand sort of played out, it just doesn't seem to me like Wynn is really going to have trip aces all that much. And there's really a number of reasons why, and it really has to do with the turn. I mean, if he limped in with a small suited ace like ace 4, ace 6, something like that, okay, maybe he just calls the bet, obviously on a dry board when the small blind leads out in a limp pot. But when Doyle overcalls and then it gets checked to him, I seriously doubt that he's going to check it over to Doyle. I do think that he's going to put in some sort of bet. Now, if he did decide to check trip aces, like a weak ace, something like that, over to Doyle, and Doyle bet, there's no way, unless he has absolutely no idea about hand strength, and I don't know anything about this particular player, but it's very unlikely that he is now going to check raise the river with a weak ace, like an ace 3, ace 4, ace 6. And that is exactly what happened as Wynn check raises the river to 30,000. Players usually fall into common patterns. If he's playing sort of a little bit scared against the legend with weak trips on the turn, he's just going to call. Remember, Doyle Brunson overbet the pot. I think that we can all agree that an unfull trip aces holding is not going to check raise here. Even if it's a hand as strong as, say, like ace jack, it's not going to check raise Doyle Brunson for a full pot size bet the way that this hand went down. So when Doyle takes this overbet sizing and then he gets check raised on the river, really the guy is representing a full house or better for value. And whether that's going to be nines full, deuces full, ace 9, something like that. The other interesting thing that you can actually do is look at the suits of the aces and the 9 that's out on the flop. And then if you're Brunson, look at the suit in your hand. There actually is no possible way that this guy can have ace 9 suited. Doyle's got the ace of diamonds, the 9 of hearts, ace of clubs, and ace of spades are out there. Now, it's the main event of the World Series. It's possible someone might be playing like ace 9 offsuit, something like that. But he could also have ace deuce suited. He could also have deuces full. He could also have 9s full, and then once in a while he can have 10s full, which is what he has here, or possibly ace 10, and I think a lot of people might limp in with ace 10 off if they're recreational players. So when he does make this raise, it's showing an immense amount of strength. There really is no value hand that's going to check raise at the end that's worse than ace king. So then it really comes that Doyle's just got a bluff catcher here with ace king. He only really beats a bluff, and in day one of the main event, and he's the most experienced, probably no-limit player in the history of all poker, he realizes that this is such an underbluff spot, and most likely his opponent would probably have to turn some sort of pair that has some sort of showdown value into a bluff to make this play. So even getting 3-1 here, he makes an incredible fold with ace king, and he is correct. Obviously, in a tournament, you want to try to save as many chips as you possibly can. So if he were to call this extra 18,000, that's going to cost him about 35 big blinds, which gets quite significant in a tournament. Would have been interesting to see if he ever makes this fold in a cash game, but there aren't a lot of people that are going to fold this particular hand the way that it went down. But it all comes back to pre-flop, the unorthodox line, and the fact that Wynn is just never, ever making a check raise for value with a worse hand here than ace king.